Amen. Just going to have to retrieve my clicker. Well, we live in a world where very little feels certain, don't we? We work hard, we make careful decisions about relationships, about money, about where we live, and we try to make life feel secure. And yet, if we're honest, even when things are going well, there is still that question in the background: have I done enough? Because circumstances change. Our health can fail. Stock markets can crash. Savings can disappear. People let us down. And most of the time, well, we can just about manage that kind of uncertainty. I guess we roll with the punches. But there's one place where that confidence starts to crumble. One place where uncertainty becomes impossible to ignore. And that is death. Now, we don't like to talk about it. We like to push it to the edges of life. We soften it with language. We say someone has passed away, or they've gone to a better place, or they're watching us from up there. We distract ourselves. We fill our lives with noise and activity, but every now and then it breaks through. A phone call, a diagnosis, a friend's funeral. And suddenly we're confronted with something that we cannot control. And with it comes the question that no one can avoid: what does happen next? Is this it? Is death simply the end? The lights going out, the story finishing, the end credits roll and we're done, nothing more? Or is there something beyond? Because if that question remains unanswered, well, doesn't everything else just rest on something pretty fragile? And that is why Easter matters. Because Easter answers the one question that we can't avoid: what happens when we die? And it answers it with certainty. You see, Easter brings a message that is the silver lining in every cloud. Because the claim of Easter is not simply that something supernatural happened, or that the disciples felt inspired, or that some kind of religious movement began. No, the claim is far more concrete than that. The Bible claims that on the first Easter morning, the man who had been publicly executed by the Romans, certifiably dead, buried in a tomb, walked out of it 3 days later, 100% alive. And if that is true, then surely that changes everything. Because as we've already heard, that means that death does not have to be the final word. It means that the grave, our graves, are not the end of our story. It means that certainty, a real certainty about the future, is actually possible. And Luke doesn't leave us guessing. He takes us right to the moment where certainty breaks in. You see, Luke chapter 24 begins very simply. Very early in the morning, the women, they go to the tomb. They take the spices that they had prepared the night before. Why? Because Jesus is dead. There is no nervous anticipation here for them. There's no expectation of a miracle, no sense that anything extraordinary may happen. They had seen him executed. They'd watched him die. They're not naive. They're certain. Jesus is dead. And so they come to the tomb in all expectation of seeing a body. But when they arrive, the stone is rolled away and the tomb is open. The body is gone. Well, we might have expected them to celebrate, but they don't. They're perplexed, confused, unsettled even, because the one thing they were sure about has suddenly been taken away from them. Because you see, dead people don't rise from the grave. None of Jesus' followers were expecting this. You see it in verse 11 again. You see, the disciples, well, they didn't believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. They dismissed their report of the women's claims as being delirious babble. But Peter, headstrong disciple, when he hears, he runs to the tomb, not because he believes in what the women have said, but because he doesn't understand. And if we're honest, we're not so different from them. We don't expect resurrection either. We assume that death is the end because that's all we've ever seen. And it's into that context of confusion that two men suddenly stand in front of the women. And they say something that completely reframes everything. Why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here. He's risen. Remember how he told you. Remember. And that's the key word here, isn't it? They don't say, look, go and find more evidence. They don't say, try and work it out for yourselves. No. They say, remember. Because this shouldn't have been a surprise. See, Jesus had already told them that this is exactly what would happen. That he would be handed over, that he would be crucified, that on the third day he would rise again. In other words, this wasn't a tragic accident. This was a promised plan. Because what looked like chaos is actually fulfillment. What looked like the end is actually exactly what God had said all along. This is the plan. In John chapter 2, Jesus had said, destroy this temple, I will raise it again in 3 days. Now, at the time, it sounded confusing. People thought, how can you build a temple that took so many years to build? How can you rebuild that in 3 days? But afterwards, it became clear. He wasn't talking about the physical temple. No, he was speaking about his own body. It wasn't just that Jesus predicted this either. The whole Bible had been quietly pointing us in this direction. Even a story you may be familiar with, the story of Jonah, swallowed by a great fish, as good as dead, but 3 days later, brought out alive. A picture of death and return. A consistent expectation that God would act through death to bring new life. So when these angels, as I suppose they must have been, say, remember, that's the turning point. Not the moment when the women see everything clearly, and not when their questions are answered, but when they realize that God has done exactly what he said he would do. You see, the resurrection is not just remarkable, it's reliable. And that fits exactly with why Luke writes this gospel in the first place. Do you know it? Right at the beginning, he says this: I have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, so that you may know the certainty of the things you've been taught. Dr. Luke, a careful physician, investigates so we can be certain. He's not writing myth. He's writing eyewitness accounts, recorded while people were still alive to challenge them. An orderly account, carefully researched, historically grounded, so that we can be certain today. And here in chapter 24, we see that certainty come into focus. Because it was promised, predicted. And once you see that, once you realize that this was always the plan, then the question shifts. Not, did this really happen? But if God keeps his promises like this, what does that mean for me? Well, it means three things. Firstly, it gives us certainty about who Jesus is. You see, the resurrection accounts, well, they're God's declaration that Jesus is exactly who he claimed to be. He's not just a teacher. He's not a moral example, not just another religious voice among many. No, Jesus is the Son of God with authority even over death. Because lots of people make big claims, don't they? But in the end, death will have the final word over all of them. The grave closes in and their voices fall silent. But not with Jesus. Because the resurrection is God saying everything he said about himself, that he came from the Father, he had authority to forgive sins, that he would judge the world, all of that is confirmed. If a man can walk out of his own grave, well, then we're in no position to sit in judgment over him, that he stands over us. You see, this is someone to listen to trust, to follow. Now, secondly, it gives us certainty about what he's done. Because if death couldn't hold him, then his death really did achieve something. It wasn't just a tragic end. It wasn't a miscarriage of justice. It wasn't just a good man dying too soon. It was a rescue, a payment for sin that has actually been accepted. Because the great question at the cross is this: did it work? Did his death really deal with sin? Or was it just a powerful idea? And the resurrection is God's answer, a resounding yes. The debt has been paid in full. Nothing outstanding, nothing left to settle, which means forgiveness is not some vague hope, not something we cross our fingers about, not something we try to earn by being a bit better, a bit kinder, a bit more religious. It's a settled reality for those who trust him. Past sin, present failure, and future guilt. All of it is covered. Not because we deserve it, but because Christ has already paid for it in full. And God has raised him to prove that it is done. And thirdly, it gives us certainty about what is coming. You see, God has kept his promise to his creation. He's begun a new start. And to follow Jesus, well, it's to be caught up in something, not something small, but in something breathtaking. We are part of the plan. Because the resurrection of Jesus is not an isolated event. It's the beginning of something so much bigger. It's the first glimpse of a world being made new. And it's all heading towards renewal, towards life, towards joy, towards the day when, as believers, we too will be raised as he was. When death will be banished, not managed, not delayed, but destroyed forever. When everything broken will be restored, when tears will be forgotten. The Bible's final vision puts it like this: God will dwell with his people. He'll wipe away every tear from their eyes. There'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, because the old order of things will have passed away. And the one seated on the throne says, I'm making everything new. Not I might, not I'll try, I am making everything new. And that means that the best is not behind us, the best is ahead of us. This is not wishful thinking, because the resurrection means it has already begun. It's like seeing those first daffodils of spring, isn't it? There may still be cold days, there may be frost on the ground, but once those daffodils appear, you know that winter has lost its grip. Spring has come, and summer is on its way. And the resurrection says, God has begun to restore his creation. He started by restoring us to himself. He'll finish what he's begun. You see, we're heading not towards darkness, but towards the light. Not towards loss, but towards fullness. Not towards an ending, but a beginning that will never end. And it's secure. Not in us, but in him. We spend our days trying to build certainty, but the one place we need it most, we cannot create it. Easter says, you don't have to. God has gifted it to you in a risen Savior, in an empty tomb, in a promise kept. So why settle for an uncertain future when a secure one is offered to you? And today, you can turn to him. And turning to him is not complicated. It simply means trusting that he really did rise. Trusting that his death was for you, and asking him to forgive you and to lead your life. You can leave behind uncertainty and striving and step into a future that is solid, secure, and full of a certain hope.